At Christmas dinner, my dad declared I was a leech, that I couldn't stay in his house anymore. So I left. Stay with me as I tell you what happened that night, and if my story moves you, I'd be grateful if you showed your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It was supposed to be a warm evening, the kind where the smell of baked turkey and sweet potato pie made the house feel like home. But instead of joy, the air felt heavy. My dad, Franklin Caldwell, sat at the head of the table like he always did. His voice carried weight in every room, and tonight his words carried knives. I had been living in their house for a while. After losing my job, it was the only place I could stay. I worked part-time wherever I could, just to keep myself afloat. I wasn't proud of it, but I was trying. At 25, I wanted more for myself, but life had knocked me down harder than I expected. As we ate, my cousin Jelani bragged about his latest investment, flashing that smug grin that made me want to roll my eyes. He loved reminding everyone of his success. My mother, Denise, kept her head down, quietly refilling glasses and pretending everything was fine. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, my father put down his fork and looked straight at me. "Imani, you're a grown woman freeloading in my house," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent, except for Jelani chuckling under his breath. My chest tightened. I tried to speak, to explain how hard I'd been working, how many nights I came home exhausted from double shifts. But before I could finish, Franklin cut me off. "Enough. You either get it together or you get out. You will not keep draining this family." I looked at my mom, hoping she'd defend me, but she avoided my eyes. That silence said everything. She wasn't going to stand up for me. Heat rose to my face. The humiliation was worse than the cold air outside waiting for me. Jelani's laughter stung, as if my failure was his entertainment. I swallowed my pride, holding back tears, and nodded. "Fine," I said softly. "If that's how you feel, I'll go." The clinking of cutlery started again, like my life hadn't just been ripped open in front of everyone. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked away from the table. No one followed me. No one tried to stop me. That was the night I realized family could turn into strangers quicker than the seasons change. And that was the night I made myself a promise. If I had to rebuild my life from the ground up, I would. And when I stood tall again, they would remember this moment. The cold air bit at my skin the moment I stepped outside. I didn't even have time to gather much, just a duffel bag with a few clothes and some shoes. My breath came out in puffs of white mist, and every step down that familiar street felt heavier than the one before it. Christmas lights blinked from other houses, windows glowing with warmth and laughter. But none of it belonged to me anymore. I kept walking, my sneakers crunching against patches of frost. The more I thought about what had just happened, the sharper the sting became. My own father had thrown me out on Christmas night, treating me like I was nothing. And my mother, she didn't say a word. That silence cut deeper than his insults. My hands trembled as I dug into my bag for my phone. I didn't know who else to call, but one name came to mind, Kenya Monroe. My best friend since high school, the one person who had seen me through every rough patch. My voice cracked when she answered. "Kenya, it's me," I whispered, my throat tight. I need a place to stay. Just for tonight." She didn't hesitate. "Girl, don't even ask. Come over. I'll leave the door unlocked." Relief washed over me, though it didn't erase the ache in my chest. I pulled my jacket tighter, quickening my pace toward the bus stop. The wind whipped against my face, but it almost felt good, like it matched the storm inside me. On the ride to Kenya's place, I stared out the window, watching holiday decorations blur past. Families sitting together, kids playing in yards, people smiling through frosted glass. It should have made me feel lonelier, but instead something stirred inside me. Anger, yes, but also a strange kind of fire. When I finally reached her apartment, Kenya pulled me into a hug without asking questions. The warmth of her arms nearly broke me, but I held the tears back. I didn't want to collapse again, not tonight. She gave me a blanket and pointed to the couch like it was already mine. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replayed every word from dinner. My father's voice, sharp and cold. My cousin's laughter. My mother's silence. I clenched my fists under the blanket, my chest burning with the weight of it all. And that was when I made a promise to myself. A vow that sank deep into my bones. One day I would rise. One day they would see me standing tall, stronger than they ever believed I could be. And when that moment came, they would choke on their own words. For the first time that night, I let a small smile tug at the corner of my lips. The world might have turned its back on me, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The weeks after leaving home turned into months of pure survival. Every morning I woke up on Kenya's couch, folded my blanket, and headed out with no certainty of what the day would bring. Bills didn't stop just because I was hurting, and the world didn't care about my bruised pride. I grabbed whatever work I could find. Some days it was a double shift at a diner, balancing trays heavier than my arms could handle, plastering on a smile for customers who barely saw me. Other days it was scrubbing office floors until my knees ached or sitting at a desk in a temp agency, answering phones for people who looked right through me. None of it was steady. None of it paid enough. But I kept moving, because standing still wasn't an option. My phone buzzed every now and then with messages from my mother. Nothing warm, nothing encouraging. Just little stabs in the dark. Hope you're figuring it out. Don't make me regret letting you go. I'd stare at those words, wishing she'd ask if I was eating, if I was safe, if I was okay. But she never did. And my father? Not a single word. His silence was louder than any insult. Meanwhile, my cousin Jalani made sure I knew how well he was doing. Social media posts of him in tailored suits, laughing over cocktails, flashing pictures of new cars and vacations. He even texted me once just to say, "Hope you're staying busy." Busy, like my life was a joke. I didn't respond. I didn't need to feed his ego. Kenya, though, she never let me drown. After long nights, when I dragged myself home smelling of grease and bleach, she'd hand me a plate of food and tell me to sit. "Don't let this harden you," she'd remind me. "Don't let their bitterness become yours." I'd nod, but deep down, I knew something was happening inside me. Every insult, every cold message, every laugh at my expense, it all piled up, pressing against my chest until it burned. I wasn't crumbling under the weight. I was forging something new. When I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling above Kenya's couch, I'd whisper to myself, "This isn't forever. This is the grind before the breakthrough." I refused to believe my life was meant to be stuck in diners and janitor closets. I knew I was capable of more. I started carrying a small notebook in my bag. Between shifts, I scribbled ideas, business names, things I wanted to learn, sketches of spaces I imagined designing. Nobody knew about it, not even Kenya. It was my secret fuel, my proof that I hadn't given up on myself. The struggle was ugly, exhausting, and lonely. But it was also shaping me. Every bitter taste pushed me closer to hunger for something greater. And though I didn't realize it yet, those long nights of scrubbing floors were planting the very seeds of my future. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just when I thought another week of dead-end shifts was about to drag me under. A small architecture firm downtown needed a receptionist. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The pay wasn't much, yet it felt like a lifeline. I ironed my one good blouse, pulled my hair back neatly, and showed up with a nervous smile and a silent prayer. The office was nothing like the noisy diners or dusty halls I had worked in before. Tall windows spilled light across polished desks, and the air carried the faint smell of paper and coffee instead of grease or bleach. The man who interviewed me, Elliot Harper, was older, his hair more silver than black, and his eyes soft but sharp. He asked me about my work experience, and I told him honestly, I had none in this field, but I was willing to learn. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes willingness is more valuable than experience," he said. And just like that, I had the job. My days started with answering phones, scheduling appointments, and keeping files in order. But I couldn't help noticing everything else happening around me. The way sketches turned into blueprints, the way samples of wood and fabric came together to tell stories in shape and color. While others saw stacks of paper, I saw possibility. Elliot must have noticed the way my eyes lingered on the drawings, because one afternoon he asked, "Imani, do you want to help me with something small?" He handed me a simple floor plan and asked me to organize the notes. I threw myself into it, careful with every line, every detail. When I brought it back, he smiled. "You have a good eye," he said softly, almost to himself. From then on, little tasks started appearing on my desk, sorting swatches, helping mock up layouts, even sitting in on client meetings to take notes. I stayed late whenever I could, soaking up everything. For the first time in years, I wasn't just working to survive, I was working toward something. The others in the office sometimes raised their brows. I was just the receptionist, yet Elliot trusted me with projects that stretched far beyond my job description. But I didn't care about their whispers. Every new task felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a future I was finally beginning to see. One night, as I left the office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My shoulders weren't slumped anymore. My steps carried more purpose. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt a flicker of pride deep in my chest. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was the first true step forward. And I knew, standing there in the glow of the streetlight, that this was only the beginning. 2 years can pass slowly when every day feels like a grind. But for me, those 2 years became the turning point of my life. The receptionist desk that once felt like a stopgap became the doorway to something bigger. Elliot Harper didn't just see me as an employee, he saw potential. And I soaked up every lesson he offered like dry soil catching rain. He taught me the basics of design first, how to balance light and color, how to read the story a room was telling. But he didn't stop there. Over late evenings in his office, he talked about contracts, budgets, and the value of relationships in business. Talent will open the door, he'd say, but discipline will keep it open. His words stuck with me more than he knew. I pushed myself harder than I ever had. My weekends became workshops, literally. I started taking on small freelance jobs, repainting a neighbor's living room, helping a local salon refresh its space, rearranging thrifted furniture for people who couldn't afford new. At first, I did it just to practice. But soon word spread. Friends of clients began calling. They said I had a gift for making old spaces feel alive again, like I could see beauty where others only saw decay. Every project became a piece of proof that I was not the failure my father had called me. With each transformation, my confidence grew. I learned to negotiate prices, to set boundaries, to carry myself not as a charity case, but as a professional. People began to respect me not just for what I did, but for how I did it. Yet at home, silence lingered. My father never once picked up the phone. Not a single call, not even on birthdays or holidays. His absence was loud, a constant reminder of how quickly he had erased me. My mother, Denise, reached out every now and then, but her words were never warm. "Are you ready to come home yet?" she'd ask in her texts, as if my progress was a game I'd eventually lose. She wanted me to crawl back, to admit I couldn't make it. I never answered the way she wanted. I kept my replies short, polite, but distant. Because deep inside, I knew I wasn't ready to go home. Not until I could walk in with my head high, not until I had built something no one could take credit for but me. There were nights I came home exhausted, hands sore from painting, mind buzzing with ideas. Kenya would look at me and shake her head, laughing. "You're a machine, Imani. Don't forget to breathe." But the truth was, I didn't want to slow down. Every hour I poured into work was another stone laid in the foundation of the life I was building. And slowly, people began to notice. My name carried weight. My work spoke louder than my past. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming. The day Elliot called me into his office, I thought it would be just another meeting about schedules or clients. But the look in his eyes told me it was bigger than that. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "Imani, it's time for me to step back. I'm retiring." My stomach dropped. The thought of the firm without him felt impossible. Then he added, "But I don't want to close these doors. I want them to stay open with you." For a moment, I just stared. Me? Take over the firm? I laughed nervously, but he didn't smile. He was serious. "You've already been running half of this place without realizing it. You have the vision, the discipline, and the fire. I'd rather sell to you than to someone who doesn't care about the legacy." I walked out of that office shaking. It seemed crazy, me, a girl who once scrubbed floors and begged for shifts, owning a company. But the idea refused to leave my mind. I scraped together every bit of savings I had and applied for a small business loan. When the papers were finally signed and the keys were in my hand, it felt surreal. The receptionist desk where I had once answered phones was now my company's front door. I named it Caldwell Designs. Using the family name wasn't just branding. It was a statement. The same name my father had tried to bury me under was now stamped on contracts, proposals, and office signs. It was mine, not theirs. The work came fast. At first, it was small jobs, redesigning cafes, giving salons fresh looks, but soon word spread. My style became known for turning dull, forgotten spaces into vibrant places full of life. Restaurant owners called, city planners called, even corporate offices wanted the Caldwell touch. Every contract signed felt like another brick in the empire I was quietly building. While my life soared, Jalani's crumbled. The cousin who once smirked at me from across the Christmas table, bragging about his investments and big moves, suddenly had nothing to brag about. His company folded, the market wiped him out, and all that swagger turned into silence. People whispered about how quickly his so-called success vanished. I won't lie, when I heard the news, I felt a satisfaction I couldn't explain. I didn't need to rub it in his face. Watching the truth expose him was enough. While his house of cards fell, mine was built on stone. Standing in my new office, looking over a stack of contracts with my name printed at the top, I realized this was more than a turning point. It was proof. Proof that no matter how far I'd been pushed down, I had climbed higher than they ever believed I could. And I wasn't stopping here. This was only the beginning. The first call came late one evening, while I was reviewing design drafts at my desk. Seeing my mother's name on the screen made my stomach tighten. She rarely reached out, and when she did, it was never warm. I let it ring twice before answering. "Imani," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Your father, he's not doing well. His health is declining. And the house, it's falling apart." Her words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, I pictured the peeling paint, the sagging roof, the place I once called home. But beneath her concern, I heard something else. It wasn't just worry about Franklin. It was desperation. I asked what she wanted from me. There was a pause then. "Maybe you could come by. Just see what you can do." Days later, another call came, this time from Jalani. His tone was suddenly sweet, like honey poured too thick. "Cousin, I've been meaning to reach out. I've seen Caldwell designs all over town. You're doing amazing things." He chuckled, then slipped in the real reason. "Maybe we could collaborate? I could really use a fresh start. You know, family helping family." I nearly laughed out loud. The same man who mocked me when I had nothing now wanted to ride on my success. He didn't care about me, he cared about saving face. One by one, the people who once pushed me aside were circling back, not out of love but out of need. And I saw it clearly. To them, I was useful now. Not because of who I was, but because of what I had built. For a while, I wrestled with it. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to remind them of the night they left me standing in the cold. But another part of me knew this was bigger. This was my chance to walk into that house not as the daughter they dismissed, but as the woman who made it without them. So I said yes. I would come back. But not as a child begging for approval. Not as the girl with nothing but a duffel bag. I would return on my terms with my head high and with the power to choose what role, if any, they would play in my life. That night, I stood by my window, looking out over the city's skyline lit up against the dark. My company's name was beginning to echo in places I once only dreamed of, and now the same family who cast me out wanted a piece of it. I whispered to myself, steady and calm. They wanted me gone. Now they want me back. But this time, I decide how the story goes. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt control. When I finally turned down the street I grew up on, it felt like walking through a memory that had been left out in the rain too long. The houses still stood where they always had, but time had left its fingerprints everywhere. Cracked sidewalks, fading paint, lawns that had lost their shine. And then there it was, my parents' house. Once, it had been the pride of the block, with its bright shutters and carefully trimmed hedges. Now the shutters hung crooked, the roof sagged in the middle like it was bowing under years of neglect, and the paint had peeled so badly the wood beneath showed through in patches. I paused at the edge of the driveway, clutching my notebook to my side. The door creaked when I opened it, and the smell hit me first, stale air, damp wood, and the faint trace of mildew. The walls were scuffed, the carpet worn thin. Pipes hissed somewhere in the distance, an uneven rhythm that told me the plumbing wasn't far from giving up. Franklin was in his chair in the living room, the same chair he'd always claimed as his throne. But he didn't look the same. His frame had thinned, his shoulders slumped, and the booming presence he once carried seemed to flicker in and out. Still, his voice carried the same edge when he spoke. "Imani," he muttered, as if my name tasted strange on his tongue. "Family ought to stick together. That's what matters." I studied him for a moment. The man who had once thrown me out on a freezing night now wanted to rewrite history with a single phrase. But I didn't argue. There was no point. Words weren't going to fix the holes in the walls or the cracks in the foundation. Instead, I pulled out my pen and opened the notebook. I walked slowly through the house, jotting down everything I saw. The leaking pipes under the sink, the sagging roofline visible from the upstairs window, the paint peeling along the baseboards, the rotted wood on the porch. Franklin's eyes followed me as I moved, but he said nothing else. My mother hovered in the background, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and the house as though waiting for me to explode. But I stayed quiet, methodical, detached. This wasn't a homecoming. This was an inspection. Each note I scribbled felt like a layer of armor. I wasn't here to argue about the past or beg for acceptance. I was here to do what I had built my life on, transforming broken spaces into something whole again. By the time I closed the notebook, I had a full page of repairs. Franklin cleared his throat, as if searching for another line about unity and family. I only nodded, tucking the pen behind my ear. For the first time in years, I stood in that house not as their daughter, but as a professional. And I knew exactly what needed to be done. The work took weeks, but when it was finished, the house barely resembled the one I had walked into that first day. The roof no longer sagged, it gleamed with new shingles. Fresh paint brightened the walls, turning the place from a tired relic into something alive again. The plumbing ran smooth, the floors shone, and the porch looked sturdy enough to hold memories once more. I stood in the living room on the final day, the sunlight streaming through newly cleaned windows, catching on the polished wood. It was beautiful, professional, clean, done with care. Exactly the kind of work Caldwell Designs was known for. Franklin sat in his chair, staring around with a mix of awe and something else, something bitter. He cleared his throat and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "So, what do I owe you?" Without a word, I pulled a neatly folded invoice from my folder and placed it on the coffee table. Every cost was written out clearly: materials, labor, hours. It was fair, but it was not cheap. I stood tall, waiting. His face reddened as he skimmed the paper. "This much? You're charging me like I'm a stranger?" I thought. His voice cracked into a sputter. "Your family, Imani." I met his eyes, steady and unshaken. "No," I said softly but firmly. 3 years ago, you told me I wasn't family. Remember? You said I was a grown woman freeloading, not your responsibility. So no, Franklin, I'm not your daughter doing you a favor. I'm the contractor you hired. And this is business." The room went silent. My mother's hands flew to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Imani, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this." But I didn't waver. I had carried too much pain for too long to let pity soften me now. Across the room, Jalani shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing as if my success was a personal insult to him. He muttered under his breath, but his glare said more than his words. He hated seeing me stand taller than him. Franklin opened his mouth again, then shut it. No argument came. He simply sat there, the weight of his pride pressing him down while I waited. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he reached for his checkbook. His hand shook as he signed his name at the bottom, the pen scratching against the paper like a final admission of defeat. I took the check without hesitation, sliding it into my folder. No smile, no extra words. Just professionalism. Then I turned toward the door. As I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. I didn't look back. My footsteps were steady, my head high. That house might have been where I came from, but it no longer defined me. In that moment, I knew my revenge wasn't cruel. It was justice. They had thrown me out with nothing, and now they had paid me for everything. When I closed the door of my apartment behind me, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. No voices arguing, no tension pressing down on my chest, just peace. I set the folder with Franklin's check on the counter and stood there for a long moment, staring at it. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. 3 years earlier, I had walked into the freezing night with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of shame. Now I stood in my own space, surrounded by furniture I had chosen, walls I had painted, and a business I had built with my own 2 hands. That check was proof of the distance I'd traveled, not just in miles but in strength. I sank into the couch, letting out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I thought I'd feel triumphant, maybe even giddy. But what settled over me wasn't joy, it was calm. Peace. Revenge hadn't been about watching them crumble. It had been about reclaiming myself. I had faced them on my terms and walked away unshaken. That was enough. Images of the past flickered in my mind. Franklin's voice booming across the dinner table, Denise's silence, Jalani's smug laughter. For years, those moments haunted me, shaping the way I saw myself. But sitting there in the quiet, I realized something important. They no longer had power over me. I didn't need Franklin's approval, or Denise's comfort, or Jalani's validation. The only person whose belief mattered was the woman staring back at me in the mirror every morning. I got up and walked to my desk, where my notebook still sat, the same one I'd carried back when I was working temp jobs and scribbling down dreams between shifts. I flipped through the worn pages filled with sketches, names, and plans. Almost every idea I had once written in the margins had now come to life. The girl who wrote those notes had been desperate, clinging to hope. The woman turning those pages now was living the proof. I smiled, not wide, not proud in a loud way, but quietly, like someone who finally understood her own worth. What happened at that house wasn't about payback. It was closure. And with closure came freedom. I turned off the light, ready to rest, knowing tomorrow I'd step back into work, into building, into creating. My life wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. And that was the greatest victory I could ever claim. As I drifted towards sleep, one truth settled in my heart, sharp and steady. Sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's becoming everything they swore you never would. Do you believe Imani made the right choice by walking away with her dignity? Or should she have given her family another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if stories like this move you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.